Good evening, and welcome to tonight's webinar on Sustainment Excellence with our special guest, SES Ms. Erica Plath. First of all, I just want to thank our sponsor, CTG, a division of Blue Raven Solutions, for sponsoring this webinar. They provide a lot of good supply chain solutions designed to keep the fleets and systems operational, ready, and safe. For more information, you can see the information at the bottom there, but thank you to CTG for sponsoring webinars and being a partner with the Navy Supply Corps Foundation. Just first, before we get to the webinar, just some background for a lot of our folks. We get a lot of our members joining these webinars, but also a lot of friends of the foundation. So Navy Supply Corps Foundation, basically our leaders and members or anyone who's ever worn the oak leaf, whether it's 1 year, 1 day, 10 years, 30 years, veterans, active duty, reserve. If you've worn the oak leaf, you're a member of our foundation. We don't charge dues. We just ask you to register so you get our information. And we're here to serve you. The mission of the Navy Supply Corps Foundation is to provide programs and services to support the Supply Corps community and promotes heritage and traditions. So a lot of people remember this or know the Supply Corps Foundation as primarily for our scholarships, but we're much more than that. Scholarships are still one of our biggest programs, but we also have a robust transition program. This year, you're going to see more about our transition program. We're actually having a 2-day leadership seminar, transition leadership seminar, face-to-face in Norfolk. And that's to help all our transitioning veterans from the military to the active or to the commercial and civilian sector. We also have our very robust heritage program. We support a lot of the ship museums that you see around the country, like the Midway and in San Diego and Missouri and Hawaii, and really helps promote our traditions. And finally, we have a recognition program. This year, we've honored 2 distinguished alumni, Mr. Daniel Danella, who was one of the founders of the Carlisle Group, and Ms. Donna Sirwanka, who is executive at CSX. And both are former supply officers, and they attribute their success in industry and business to their Supply Corps background. So again, you can see we're much broader than scholarships, so scholarships is still one of our very important and biggest programs. And what can we do for you? Well, we're a connection to the Supply Corps. We maintain a big professional and social network. We have a lot of information we put out of what's going on in the Supply Corps community, also about our programs I just mentioned. Also have a lot of leadership opportunities, both at the foundation, at the national board level, and also at our 38 chapters worldwide. We encourage you to reach out to your local chapter, get involved, get engaged. You can always contact me. We're always looking for volunteers. We're a small staff. There's myself and my assistant. And a lot of volunteers, and we would appreciate it. I think you really enjoy it, both at either chapter level or at the national level. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the foundation chairman, Captain Retired Eddie Fishburne, who's going to introduce our guest speakers. So Eddie, over to you.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I won't take much time. I would just like to thank you for your time and for joining the webinar tonight. And at this point, I'm going to introduce somebody who really needs no introduction, our former chairman and retired Admiral Mike Lydon, who will introduce our guest speaker. So Mike, take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. And good evening, everyone. What an event we have for you this evening. Our guest is Miss Erica Plath, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Sustainment, working for her boss, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for RDA. She's part of a new generation of leaders. She was commissioned 4 months prior to 9/11, graduating in 2001 from the Naval Academy with a degree in aeronautical engineering. What an incredible time to start a career. And I'd make 2 observations about her career without going through the entire bio. You know, first, there's a flow to it, starting as a surface warfare officer in the fleet on 2 separate ships, and then moving ashore to the Navy Ops Center in the Pentagon. Then as a civilian, she continued her contributions, moving through industry into NAVC, over to OpNav and N96, and then N42, and then senior leadership postings as an SES and OpNav N4. I guess what a flow of experience that she's had. And the second observation, more specifically, how this flow has, I think, expertly prepared her for her current role, and I'll put it in my words, the key Navy lead for meeting the challenges of contested logistics, strategic sea lift, and sustaining the current and future force at a time when the nation and Navy faces incredible challenges. I had the pleasure of hearing her speak at a retired flag officer breakfast last fall. I have to tell you, she was impressive. I thought to myself, she would be great to talk to the foundation. So I'm so happy that she graciously accepted our invitation. And ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce Miss Erica Plath. So ma'am, over to you.
Thank you very much. I want to confirm that you can hear and see me. All good? Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the invitation this evening. I have to say this is one of the nicest ways to actually get to work with the Supply Corps, because I actually get to be home tonight. It's wonderful. So if you hear any noises upstairs, I have 2 kids, and my husband is he's a volunteer firefighter in his free time and is currently in a class online for his firefighting instructor certification. So we get to talk tonight about sustainment excellence, which is a topic very near and dear to my heart. I think we've already kind of, mentioned my background. I wouldn't say that I have a specific career that, I was consistently doing sustainment, but I have worked in and around it for a very long time, starting with my time as a surface warfare officer, Mike, like you mentioned. So ultimately, I became DAS in Sustainment back in May of 2022, so almost 2 years ago, and I am technically the second DAS in Sustainment. The position and the concept was created when the law changed in the 2017 timeframe. The NDAA altered Title 10 to include within the list of AS and RDA's responsibilities that of sustainment, including maintenance, and this role was established. So when I came into the role, the Navy, and probably to a certain extent, even today, is still trying to figure out how does sustainment fit into the overall landscape. And I can't think of a group of people more understanding of what sustainment is and what its value is to the Navy than the entire Supply Corps Foundation. But I thought I'd take a couple of minutes to say what it means to me and then talk about how I kind of apply that to everything from contested logistics to my priorities and kind of where I see us heading. So I always like to say, what is sustainment? I think the Joint Pub 4 offers the most succinct definition that I have found, which is that it is the provisioning of logistics. Now, it's important to immediately dive into what is logistics in that context. And I think there are 2 key important sub-definitions to logistics that we have to talk about and tease out because of things like the Goldwater-Nichols Act. So when I think of logistics coming from the acquisition community's perspective, I think about the life cycle logistics acquisition workforce and specifically product support, to include the 12 elements of product support, which I'm not going to list for you tonight. But that truly, from an acquisition perspective, is the definition of sustainment. Now, product support truly is how we establish, as we deliver our weapon systems and then sustain them through their life cycle, how we ensure that we have all of our, logistics bases covered when it comes to ensuring that the product is supportable throughout its life. Now, product support has a lot of overlap, but it is not specifically linked to operational logistics. Now, operational logistics is obviously described in Joint Pub 4, and it offers 11 pillars within it. I find the most interesting part when we talk about product support and operational logistics together is that there are key overlap areas: operational contract support, maintenance, infrastructure, engineering. So these disciplines, and most importantly, supply support, these disciplines are really where I see a strong nexus between the operational logistics community and the acquisition product support community that conducts sustainment. And all of this comes together, most importantly, when we start to talk about contested logistics. And Mike, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because contested logistics is something that I started working on a lot when I was in OpNav N4, first as the OpNav N42, and then again in my second role in OpNav N4 before I came over to DAS and Sustainment. And it really is figuring out how to strengthen our operational logistics efforts and how to align those to the needs of our product support strategies in order to make sure that we can meet the mission requirements of our warfighters in a contingency operation. So today, in my role as DAS and Sustainment, it's a slightly different lens to contested logistics, but all pointed toward the same North Star of being successful in a contingency. And I'm really getting after contested logistics in two ways. One, very specific in my day-to-day efforts, and another more broadly because it truly is a multidisciplinary problem and approach that we have to take in order to be successful in contested logistics. So I'm going to kind of break it down in two ways. The first is AS and RDA established a few years ago the Wartime Acquisition and Sustainment Surge Program, which everyone calls WASP for short. Now, WASP is understanding how the acquisition community can support and enable logistics when it comes, or it's not just logistics, support the warfight when and if something happens. For me, when we break it down, there's acquisition and sustainment. I am very focused on making sure that we have the appropriate plans to support WASP on the logistics side. So as recently as Monday evening, I met with all of the SysCom executive directors to make sure that we are shoring up our plans for how we would conduct logistics, particularly sustainment activities in a contingency operation. And this kind of gives a nice example of how we are bringing together operational logistics and sustainment. So the question that I have posed to our executive directors at our systems commands to include NAVSUP, Mr. Wendelken actually is helping to lead that effort, is how do we understand what we need to do for battle damage and repair, supply support in a contested logistics environment, engineering support in a contested logistics environment, and contracting. And how do we do those efforts with three key components, which are our authorities, our resources, and this is very specifically our supplemental resources, so beyond the president's budget, and our human resources. Unlike the Army and the Air Force, the Navy more significantly relies on its civilians in addition to its military in order to conduct logistics. So we have to understand the full complement of our contract workforce, our civilian workforce, and our military workforce in order to accomplish our objectives. And we have collectively agreed that we're going to be working through a set of efforts with one major milestone coming here in a few months, to make sure that we are really preparing ourselves appropriately. And if we can think, in the World War II quote, it's not the plan, but the planning that counts. This is all about teaching ourselves to plan in a way that we haven't thought about in many years. And so it is creating new muscle movements and helping ourselves point in the same North Star direction and make sure collectively that we can understand how to execute contested logistics. So that's a little bit on what I'm doing with WASP. Now, we also want to think about contested logistics. I'm going to kind of rely on some of my N4 time. OPNAV N4, in their work on contested logistics, has coined the term the 5 Rs, or the maritime sustainment response vectors. And those 5 Rs are rearm, refuel, resupply, repair, and revive. And I'm going to go through each of them and some of the things that I think from a multidisciplinary acquisition community perspective that we are working on today and kind of at a high level where we're driving to. And if anybody is interested in learning more, then I'm happy to answer that in Q&A. But I'm going to go through them very quickly. So we have rearm. Obviously, the key component to rearm at the outset is having enough munitions in order to conduct rearm. So there is a lot of work going on to shore up our production lines and to make sure that we're making the right investments in order to have the quantity of munitions in the right places in order to meet contingency operation needs. We're also getting after supply chain risks associated with our munitions lines. So we are working on ways to do new contracting. We are working on ways to do multi-year procurements so that we can strengthen the industrial base in order to ensure that the munitions production lines are there when we need them. We are also working on new and innovative ways of moving those munitions in a contingency environment. So everything from thinking about how to use unmanned surface vessels, how to use new and innovative techniques to potentially move munitions at sea. These are all new capabilities that we are considering and investing in order to help us conduct rearm. On the moving on to refuel. So our defense fuel sites are critical locations that we need to make sure are available for our forces. And we also need to think about how we are going to move fuel inside a theater of operations. From that perspective, we need to make sure that we have the force structure in order to move the fuel in the right time, to the right time and place to support our operations. There's a lot of work going on that started when I was in OpNev N4 on creating the requirements for our next generation logistics ship, as well as continuing to construct the new TAO 205 class of fleet oilers. And looking at how we can ensure the supply industrial base for all of the types of fuel that we need to conduct our operations. So a lot of opportunity there in refuel. And then we go to resupply. So obviously, I'm sure near and dear to all of your hearts, that same force structure that delivers our fuel also delivers our repair components. So making sure that we have the right force structure in order to meet those needs is critical. We also, from a product support standpoint, understanding the modeling for our supply and making sure that we have a stronger linkage between the program office models for operational availability in order to do the supply planning are updated, have the right information, are feeding the sparing model so we make sure that we both resource and execute the procurements for the correct supply spares and backup kits is a critical component to making sure that we can conduct the right resupply. And then moving to, I'm going to go to actually revive next. Normally I would do it last, but I kind of want to, we're going to talk about repair in a little bit more detail. So on the revive side, so this is how do we provide healthcare services to our men and women on the front lines. Here we have another opportunity to build force structure and add capabilities. So the medical community has been very involved in how we think about revive, taking care of our people in a contested environment. Many of the recent experiences when it comes to revive capabilities are our lessons are primarily through the efforts in the Middle East and what we have been doing through OEF, OIF, and those other operations. In that world, many of you may have heard of the concept of the golden hour, where we found that we could be very successful delivering healthcare services to those in need through the movement by air and by ground. And if we could get medical care to an injured warfighter within an hour, then the likelihood of success was very high. Now, in other theaters, primarily in maritime theaters, where we were talking about the vastness of an ocean, a helicopter does not have the range that we may need to support in some larger theater. So we have to think about what are the other alternatives to how we would operate in a larger theater with different capabilities. So the Navy has done a lot in this area to think about how we would have a longer care chain, the opposite of a kill chain, how we would have a longer care chain in order to support our warfighters. And we're doing a couple of things. So one of the most exciting ones is, in addition to our hospital ships, we are also looking at how to construct and deliver, and we are delivering here very soon, new, I call them ambulance ships because it's the most conceptually understandable, that in an area where we may have a golden week instead of a golden hour, how do we provide ambulatory type care while we are connecting the forward edge to our larger hospital capabilities over a longer time? And the EPF class of ships, which is a high-speed ferry, high-speed transport, is being re-outfitted, altered to have medical capability and take a V-22 on deck for patient movement. So that's a very exciting capability that the Navy is rolling out. And in fact, one of those ships is going to be delivered with an unmanned, so I'll call it for simplistic terms, self-driving capability that offers us an opportunity to learn how to apply unmanned technology to a logistics asset, which brings together capability. It brings in contested logistics. So it's a very exciting opportunity for us in the Revive area. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we have repair. So maintenance and engineering in alignment with the supply is one of the biggest opportunities we have, I think, especially on the acquisition side and working with our systems commands to really bring life to a new concept of being able to repair more forward. So we are doing a lot of work on battle damage and repair, and we are working with the fleet to understand how we can exercise those capabilities. This is an area where we are needing to do some work with Congress because there are limitations on what kinds of maintenance that we can do for home ported ships in the United States. The good news is we already do maintenance with foreign providers far from our shores, primarily with our military Sea Lift Command. Because those ships are not home ported in the United States, they don't have a home port designation. We have less restrictions, and we've been able to open up different ports, different locations where we could do maintenance forward. And we are looking at how we think about ways to use our forward deployed naval forces in order to help us learn to build our contracting muscles, our engineering muscles, and match maintenance standards between Navy maintenance standards and foreign providers to be able to support our ships, our aircraft, and ultimately our facilities forward. So a lot going on there, and I can't stop. And I'm gonna add, and I'm gonna talk about it again in a little bit, advanced manufacturing. So there is a ton of new technology out there. Many of you have probably seen polymer 3D printers as one example. You may have heard of CNC machines, which is a type of subtractive manufacturing. There's also cold spray technology. And a number of different technology areas that can really open up alternatives for us to do repair forward and bring new self-help technology to our ships that are forward and to bring new technologies into our depots. And so bringing this new technology in is a major focus area of how we harness it, how we operate with it. It's not without its challenges. Some of these technologies are 40 years old. It's not that we don't want to bring them in. It's really thinking through all of the different factors of sustainment in order to bring these technologies. I'll say a great example of advanced manufacturing that we're doing today that aligns to repair is we had a ballistic missile submarine in depot back last year. And we're having some challenges in castings and forgings in this country right now, and obsolete materials. And the submarine needed a diffuser plate, which is a small round metal plate. It's not complex, but it needed to be casted. That's the traditional manufacturing method. And it was going to be 6 months because the company that had manufactured them in the past had gone out of business, and we didn't have an easily accessible mold to cast a new component. But fortunately, because folks are aware that we're trying to build new connective tissue in advanced manufacturing, the submarine community actually was able to reach back to NAVSEA, and NAVSEA connected them to a different depot, a Marine Corps depot, ground depot in Barstow, California, who is experimenting and really scaling advanced manufacturing and additive manufacturing technology. They were able to print the part in 2 weeks and ship it up to the submarine and actually install it, which is the first instance of us installing a metal advanced manufactured component in a ballistic missile submarine. And that just happened last May. Very exciting. How can we take that work and scale it? But it's not without its challenges. And I never want, you don't want to detract from new capability, but we have to be realistic about what we can do and what else we need to learn. So one of the biggest things I learned in the process is I was explaining this to another group of people, and DLA reached out to me and asked, how are we monitoring that component for performance? And then how are we ensuring if we deinstall that component that it's properly marked so that we don't necessarily let it re-enter the supply system and there's not a recognition that the metallurgy of that component is different than other components or that it may have a different life. So there's just so many things to think about when it comes to introducing advanced manufacturing, but it is a game-changing technology opportunity for us that can help in battle damage repair and contested logistics. So Obviously, contested logistics is a key focus area for us, but it is one component of what I do every day. So I'm going to take a step back and really talk about kind of the overall topic for this evening, which is driving sustainment excellence. Um, so for me, it's really about identifying the highest leverage activity and then making sure we can focus on it, swarm it, identify what the key North Star objective is, what are the best ways to solve it, make the right selection, and then drive it to completion, and then move on to the next as quickly as possible. So what I'm going to walk through is I have a set of priorities, which are broad, overarching efforts that span many years in order to drive them. And then I have very specific projects that I'm working on uh, inside of those overarching priorities. And I thought I would kind of talk about the context of both. And then I'm going to look forward to your questions. So overall, what are my priorities today? The first is our program. So this is new weapon systems that are delivering. With a primary focus on those that are in sustainment, because we are doing our sustainment reviews, which is the new legislation that came out in the last several years. The Navy officially began conducting sustainment reviews and reporting them to Congress in 2022, around the same time that I arrived. And we're continuing to mature that process in alignment with what we call the Gate 7. So for those of you that are familiar with the major defense acquisition process, that has different phases of requirements definition, the acquisition phase, and the sustainment phase. The sustainment phase is the newest. We call that overall system in a very traditional way. We call that the Navy's 2-pass, 7-gate system. The 2 passes being the requirements and acquisition phases, and then the 7 gates being the points at which we are monitoring progress of the weapons system. So the Gate 7 is the newest and last gate, and it's actually repeated once every 5 years, post IOC of major weapons, of our ACAT 1, of our largest acquisition programs, of which the Navy has about 40. And what happens in order to manage our workload, we conduct a Gate 7 on average 8 or so programs per year, based on their cycle and when they IOC. We're also preparing for new systems to IOC and monitoring the whole Gate 7 process. So that's the ACAT programs within my overall program priority. I also have programs that I help RDA oversee, primarily our infrastructure optimization programs for our depots. So we are modernizing all of our depots in the Navy today, and they're in various stages, the largest of which is our shipyard infrastructure optimization program. My next priority is sustainment service. So this is very specifically quality of service efforts, which I'll explain more in a second, and WASP, which I've already talked about. The next is strengthening our suppliers. So working on our implementation plans where we have identified risk, and actually standing up the process by which we integrate where program offices understand their risk and how that interacts with our understanding from external sources about their individual supply chain risk and health of our suppliers, and how we identify where the highest leverage activity is in order to swarm it and improve so that we can support our weapons systems. I'll get to it in a second. When I get into my projects. And then the next is sustainment maturation. So like I said, we are doing our Gate 7s, but there are also the other preceding 1 through 6 gates. So how are we driving better discussion and clarity and asking the right questions at the right time within the gates and milestones of our acquisition programs? So beginning all the way in the requirements process, do we have a good understanding of key requirements specifically for sustainment? So I think about availability, reliability, maintainability. As we mature the program, are we making sure that we are building the right infrastructure? Are we going to deliver the depots? Are we going to have the right levels of organic and commercial repair for our components? So making sure that we're standing up all the right pieces, that we're using model-based systems engineering in order to drive better sustainment considerations into the design. So a lot of opportunity, a lot of new technology that we can bring in order to improve and mature the sustainment processes within the Navy. And then last but certainly not least, our people, professionalizing sustainment. So we have our direct life cycle logistics workforce within the defense acquisition workforce, of which the national lead AO is within my office, and we are working to actually bring on board that full responsibility, and also focusing on our product support managers. And then the broader sustainment community. So there are many components to the sustainment community, our depots being a great example, our supply community, where not everyone is necessarily part of the defense acquisition workforce, but they are key elements of our overall sustainment network. So making sure that we are properly considering the entire workforce and bringing them and lifting them up so that we can be more successful. So like I said, those are very broad topics that will actually extend over years. And in order to help myself focus, just like I said, I like to identify the highest leverage activity, set a timeline to it, right? Smart goals, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound, and then drive those specific pieces. So today, the projects that I am working on, advanced manufacturing. So we are developing the first Department of the Navy strategy for advanced manufacturing that has at least 3 lines of effort on leveraging commercial technology, modernizing our depots with advanced manufacturing, and then bringing advanced manufacturing into the hands of our warfighters. And we have a very specific goal of creating a program for delivering advanced manufacturing to our warfighters this year. In terms of quality of service, so some of you may have been aware that of the George Washington challenges when they were in a major long-term availability, what we call an RCOH, in Newport News, Virginia, along with some other challenges we had at our Mid-Atlantic Regional Maintenance Center. And so the Navy has become very focused on improving what we call the quality of service for our sailors. The CNO and the Secretary of the Navy issued a letter last year articulating what their expectations are for quality of service. And today we are very specifically working on the City of Newport News in coordination with HII Newport News, who is the shipbuilder and deliverer of our modernized aircraft carriers, and how we can ensure that we are properly supporting with the right infrastructure, the right services that are installation-like, to make sure that our sailors can be successful while we are shepherding those platforms through their construction and major overhauls. The next is WASP. I've already kind of spoken about the overarching goal. Very specifically this year, we are looking to have updated what we call wartime response plans from our SysComs to ensure, from my end, we have the right sustainment strategies in place. And then F-35 sustainment. So some of you may be familiar that Congress issued a piece of legislation in the NDAA of FY22 called Section 142, which directs the services to lead the sustainment activities for the F-35 platform. So we are very specifically working towards a decision on what the Navy's objectives are for F-35 sustainment and how we will implement that language. And then I mentioned before, but it's worth repeating because of the level of investment. Major project is the Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program. I was just in Hawaii a few weeks ago. We drove the corner pile of the largest infrastructure project ever executed by the United States Navy, which is the building of a new dry dock, what we're calling Dry Dock 5 in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Very exciting thing to see happening, and we have much more to go. So there's already been a lot of work done, many more dry docks to construct in order to support all of our new weapon systems. Ford class capability, Virginia Block 5, the Virginia class. There is a lot of need for us to modernize the infrastructure associated with our depots, and the Shipyard Infrastructure Optimization Program is critical to those efforts. And then last but not least, supply chain efforts. So how we bring together external understanding of our suppliers, what we call the risk management process, where we understand their financial health, their environment that they're operating in, geopolitical concerns, to their manufacturing capacity, and how that interacts with and comports with what our programs understand to be their critical suppliers, their single or sole source suppliers, and where we see an overlap, can we identify a better supply chain risk metric to use in our gate reviews so that we can identify and focus the Navy where we need to swarm a problem. And hopefully do so in a predictive way rather than a reactive way, so that there is never a disruption in service. So that was just a brief summary of my priorities and my projects that I have going on right now. Um, so I just want to close my remarks by saying thank you all for everything that you have done in your past as members of the supply chain. And if you are of the supply corps, and for those of you online that are members of the supply corps today, thank you so much for your service. It is amazing to see the level of dedication and what you all do every day. I am so thankful to be a part of this community. And I am looking forward to your questions. And also, for those of you in the Philadelphia area, I understand there is a ball this Friday and I will be there. So if you are online tonight and you would like to meet in person, I will be there and I look forward to meeting you. So thank you all for your time this evening, and I will open up the floor to questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Erica. You did exactly as I expected, a wonderful overview, and you answered a lot of the questions that came in from the folks already. But let's hit on a few, and we'll go into some of yours. But first, you're in a unique position with a perspective across the whole sustainment enterprise, I guess I would say. And what do you think? How is it organized? Is it effective? Because we have all the maintenance and supply. You're talking to the supply folks here in the fleet. As we try to do all of the things that you've outlined, do we have the right organizational structure and connections and integration?
So we often have a lot of discussion about that. I firmly believe that if we understand what our underlying objectives are, right, our North Star objectives, I think we can accomplish anything with nearly any organizational structure. The complexity and the matrix nature of the Navy, it's so broad. I don't think there is any perfect organizational structure. There is always things that we can tweak on the edges. I think if I had to say something that I have found enlightening, because I can see the entire, I guess I have a better perspective on the enterprise level, working in the Secretariat. I think the biggest thing I have learned over the last 2 years is the impact of the Goldwater-Nichols Act. So we talked, I mentioned the provisioning of logistics, the purpose of sustainment, life cycle logistics versus operational logistics. So many of you may be familiar, but the Goldwater-Nichols Act effectively has what are the responsibilities of the Secretariat, AS and RDA, and the other assistant secretaries versus what is the responsibility of the military uniformed services. The systems commands in the United States Navy, it would be the material commands in the Army and the Air Force, really have a lot of our logistical responsibilities. So everyone, now, there's NAVSUP, there is DLA, but there's also logistical responsibilities in all of our major systems commands. And they report to CNO, because CNO is responsible for man, train, and equip. And then you have on the acquisition side, we have all of our major acquisition efforts. And I think probably a lot of folks that have operated in that system have seen friction because of the way that the Goldwater-Nichols Act establishes that structure. I think we're able to reach across the aisle a lot of times, but sometimes, the right hand doesn't necessarily talk to the left. And we have an opportunity to think and consider, how could we do that better? So like with anything, I think gathering the data and looking at the options and thinking about what could we do better is something that's our responsibility to do every day. And so as we build and gather data through everything from their P2Ps, perform to plan efforts going on within the CNO and VCNO's purview. NAVSUP has one that Admiral Epps is leading, to what we are doing in our Gate 7s. We have this amazing ability to kind of bring the two together from two different perspectives. How is I'll use the supply community specifically, how is the supply corps community's North Star objectives? How do they comport with our readiness needs and our weapon system availability needs? And how is the procurement of capabilities, the procurement of components, how does that align when we look at how the acquisition community makes assessments to best support their individual weapon systems, and how the enterprise system interacts with that? So we continue to try and tie those things together better so that we can really bring into sharp relief where there's opportunity to make corrections.
Okay, well, thank you, thank you. Hey, and you mentioned North Star a couple of times, and I know that that's probably a new term to some folks. Can you just kind of explain that quickly and maybe give us an example of one from somewhere there?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So the term North Star objective is something that the previous VCNO Lesher, established a few years ago. So, well, I will give you an example of one that we literally have been working on almost since I arrived in DAS and Sustainment. So, an example of a North Star when it comes to sustainment and readiness is we know. Many people will say how ready do we need to be, how much maybe supply performance do we need in order to support a platform. Very specifically, VCNO Lesher helped lead the Navy through an effort to say we were having challenges with the FA-18 aircraft. Specifically, we had continued to buy aircraft, but the number of aircraft we could physically generate to conduct operations was really holding flat, despite the fact that we had bought more aircraft. And the question was, how are we not able to increase force generation? And there was a lot of discourse, some of it laden with a lot of friction on what the best approach was. There were a lot of hypotheses. And finally, folks realized that all of these different communities within the Navy, the resourcing community, the requirements community, the acquisition community, different elements of the fleets, the supply community, everybody had a different perspective on how they could help. And in some cases, they might be getting cross-threaded and actually detracting from readiness rather than being coordinated in their efforts. And so Vice Chief Lesher at the time sat down with all of those communities and realized that they needed to have a common objective in order to be able to talk together. And so they established a North Star, which was fundamentally, we're talking about aircraft. How many do you need? Different people were operating off of different percentages. Nobody knew what that percentage really meant, because different people included different, there was a different numerator and denominator. The result was they came up with a mission capable quantity, which they said was their North Star. They wanted to achieve, I'll say, 400 up jets. That was the goal. How do we deliver 400 up jets? And everyone knew they had their piece of delivering 400 up jets. So for the supply community, what do we need to do in terms of supply to make 400 up jets consistently? For the repair community, for the FRCs, what does your repair turnaround time need to be in order to achieve 400 up jets? And then everyone took their piece. So the FRCs needed to improve the repair turnaround time. The supply community needed a greater investment in onboard spare parts. There were different activities that had to happen in order to bring the entire platform up to that 400 up jets. And I think the original goal was 351. The reason I say 400 is they hit it after about a year's worth of work. And then they went higher, and then they adjusted that number. Through that progress, the aviation community realized they needed to use that concept across all of their airframes. And so now, coming in as DAS and Sustainment and having seen that effort, we have applied that concept of a North Star objective to align all of the constituencies for all of our weapon systems. And we are monitoring that performance with set goals for all of our systems that are going through Gate 7s.
Okay, hey, thanks. Kind of following on that, we received a lot of questions on both sustaining legacy and then the new technologies, and you've kind of addressed both. With the aviation was the legacy stuff and keeping it going, and then you've talked about new technology. You said recently that we need to field promising technologies while keeping focus on management and sustainment of legacy systems. How does Navy keep this focus with the pressure to put out new technologies and meet the latest challenges? How do we avoid, the next F-18 or something like that? Will this system do that?
I think that it will. So I think that it was really good that we established the sustainment review and Gate 7 process, because that is a way to make sure that everyone from the acquisition community to the resource and requirements communities to the fleets are aligned on how we're performing. Because the concept that it's a set it and forget it for a weapon system is not reality. We have seen, just like with F-18, that you can deliver a successful platform, and we know it's a capable warfighting system, but how that system operates relative to evolving threats and relative to other real world scenarios can adjust what our understanding is. Also, engineers to a certain degree aren't able to forecast all of the environments or all of the ways that we might use a platform 20 years in the future. So I often say that we will know what a 30-year-old name your weapon system, I like to say DDG because I served on them. We will know what a 30-year-old DDG 51 class ship looks like when we have them. So there is learning that has to occur throughout the life, and there are things that we're going to have to learn to respond to. So we need a level of focus continuously on all of our weapon systems throughout their life. And we have to do that, like you said, in balance with delivering the next fleet and in balance with envisioning the fleet after next. So in any given day, and I like to say in any given budget, this is kind of harkening back to my time in OpNav when I was a resource sponsor, we have to constantly maintain the fleet that we have, build to the fleet of the future, because that is a whole industrial base in and of itself. We have to build the fleet after next, which is the S&T and the R&D communities envisioning those future capabilities to make sure we stay at the forefront of technology. And we have to do all of that together in balance. It's not an easy thing to do, but it is, from a very corporate sense, exactly what we are charged to do in leading the Navy, making sure that we have that constantly operating business model that takes care of all of our elements and ensuring that those processes are overseeing those efforts.
Yep, sounds good. So recently I heard the VCNO speak, and he talked about the lessons learned from the Red Sea from an operator perspective. How about from the sustainment perspective? What are the couple key takeaways, to finish off with, that you would have from there so far?
Trying to think. I also in fact, interesting that you bring it up. So this week is the Navy Flag Officer and SES conference. So once a year we all get together, the entire wardroom. And today I actually got to listen to the Fifth Fleet Commander, Vice Admiral Cooper, or he just recently departed, talk about what we are learning in the Red Sea. So I'm filtering through that discussion today. I think it really harkens back to a few things. Trying to be very cautious in my comments. One is, obviously, we talked about the need to make sure that as we engage in contingency operations, I'll call it, we have to make sure we have the appropriate munitions available and that we have the right supply chains to make sure that we can support those whatever assets are in theater. There has been a huge connected logistics supply chain in order to make sure that those ships ships and aircraft are successful. So Military Sea Lift Command was highlighted in their ability to support them with food, supply parts, fuel at the appropriate times, and to manage the incoming and outgoing assets. Obviously, we talked about munitions and that criticality. There was one other piece that I thought was interesting. There was a lot of talk about sustaining our people as well, and thinking through how we have bases of operation further from the fight in order to be able to flow ships through, and how we think about what our sustaining locations are, still close to the theater but further removed. So a lot of fascinating things to consider. in the tactical, operational, and strategic level.
Okay. Kind of a lead or add on to that is the disconnected side of the house. If anybody's read Damlestad Reedus's 2034, where they shut down the units and they're by themselves. When that comes to the logistics side of the house, is that something that's being thought about?
So absolutely. I mentioned when I was talking about the WASP, wartime acquisition and sustainment surge program, the importance of being able to do maintenance, supply support, engineering support, and contracting. So our warfighters, when faced with a scenario, are responsible for making the best decision available to them at the time. Our best engineers and our best logisticians, many of them are back here in the United States. And so we are all reliant on communication systems in order to provide that best advice to the commander forward. So we have to be thinking about how do we ensure the appropriate communications and also the appropriate certifications to enable our forces and those that support them to connect appropriately. And there's a lot of exciting discussion about C4I capabilities that will enable that.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you have an exciting job and don't have to worry about what you're going to do when you go into work in the morning there.
No.
But, I want to switch topics completely here. So this is the Supply Corps Foundation. One of the big goals is transition assistance to its members.
Yes.
And so for you, you transitioned out of the Navy, transitioned from uniform to civilian and that. When people are at that point, are there any tips you would give them to our folks, especially the junior officers that are listening? Not to leave early, but when they do decide to leave.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody, I will argue everyone at some point is going to transition, even if it's after 40 years of wonderful service to our nation. They're still going to transition to civilian life. So it's applicable to everyone. It is so for those that have not yet transitioned, it is a significant transition. And I think the thing that I first want to tell people is that it's an exciting time where you have to redefine a little bit of yourself and find where you want to go. And you suddenly find yourself exposed to every option in the world. And most people think, wow, to be able to do whatever I want is amazing. But I find for most people, and definitely for me, it was more overwhelming than it was exciting. Because I'm sure, like most people, I had responsibilities. I had a brand new baby when I departed the Navy, and so it was really more about how am I going to step into adulthood in this new life as a civilian, and how am I going to find my way. And that's where I will say organizations like the Supply Corps Foundation can be critical. So for me, as a Naval Academy graduate, I used I attended TAP and did those things, but really the way that I found my path was through the Naval Academy Career Conference. And what I will say is, as a civilian, and it's true when you're in uniform as well, it's all about your network. I have never gotten a job, including all of my job changes as a civilian, without having networked into it, having someone ask me if I was interested in a role. So learning to network, getting comfortable, building that process, that's part of transition assistance. And I always offer to anyone, if someone needs to sit down and talk about how do I do that, how do I envision that, I always offer that opportunity. So really having a way to find that network and just take that first step. The first job doesn't have to be the best job in the world. We always talk about like Mr. Right or Mr. Right Now. First job can be just Mr. Right Now. And then you have an opportunity to learn, create a stronger foundation, and then grow from there. So that was what I learned.
Well, it sounds like it worked very well for you. And I think that's it for us tonight. We could ask you questions all night because it's been a wonderful time. Thank you very much. And I hope to get to hear you again. And I'm going to turn you back over to Eddie there. So thank you, Erica. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for moderating, and thank you, Erica, very much for your for making time for us. It's really, really appreciated. So to everybody on the call, I want to thank you for signing up tonight and getting on the call. And again, as I always do, remember, please reach out and participate with your local chapter of the Supply Corps Foundation. They need your support. And as always, if you can afford it, please donate. We always need support so we can continue with the programs we offer, and we can help you with networking too. So much appreciated. Dan, take it away.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And thank you, Ms. Plath. Thank you, Admiral Leiden, for joining us. Our next webinar will be on April 3rd. Retired Admiral Mike Mullen will be our guest speaker. He'll be talking on geopolitical issues. So that should be a really good webinar. Hopefully you can join us. Again, follow us on social media. We do appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you for attending.